actually, it doesn't.
All right, good.
3, 2, 1. Okay, we're live.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, we're live here too. Okay.
Yes, we're both on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah. All right.
And I hope that this music in the background is not damaging the.
Here we have Fulvio di Blasi. He is the president of the Thomas International Center. And today we're going to be talking about his most recent book.
And you are Harrison Lee, right?
Right, sorry. And I'm Harrison Lee. I'm the program coordinator at the Thomas International Center. And today we're going to be talking about Fulvio di Blasi's most recent book, which is Ancient Wisdom and Thomistic Wit, Life. And
which I'm just seeing for the first time.
Right.
Actually, I just saw the Italian version so far, and today, thanks to Harrison, I'm seeing for the first time this one, which looks pretty cool. And the picture is by my wife. I need to double check with her, but she took care of this design. So thank you, Francesca. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the book. One of the main emphases of the to explain principles from ancient and medieval philosophy, particularly from the Aristotelian and Thomistic tradition, by relying on the lens of contemporary culture, and also a reverse direction to sort of analyze contemporary culture from the perspective of the Aristotelian and Thomistic tradition within ethics. And so one of the things that stood out to me about this project is that, you know, our culture today has in so many ways rejected the insights of the Aristotelian and Thomistic tradition that in a way it's surprising that there's enough material within our culture to be able to use culture to explain these principles that come from this tradition. And so I wanted to ask you, Fulvio, about what it says about the lasting relevance of this tradition, that even in a culture that has essentially tried to, you know, snuff out the insights that it's presented to us, it still keeps rearing its head.
Well, I think that people really need to go back to realistic philosophy today. They need to. They are looking for the truth. They just don't find the truth most of the times. They are becoming more cynical. They don't believe in strong virtues. They are skeptical about the people being good, or they don't trust faithfulness in human relationships. And so one good thing about this is that people are longing for a different approach to things. So I think that the ground is excellent to, you know, put the seeds of ancient wisdom. That's why I also like this kind of title very much, because ancient philosophy and medieval philosophy and theology is all about wisdom. It's all about having an overall viewpoint on reality that is not limited to some very specific, very little things. Some people are drunk today. They're kind of they drink too much of just their little specialization, their little word. I mean, some people, even some Catholic people I know, they are excellent in their own profession. Maybe they know everything about some I don't know, robots or or some of the secrets of the stock market. And then they have no idea about even basic truth of morality or even the Catholic faith. They're like a crippled. I mean, one leg is very strong, the leg in their profession, in their ordinary things, and the other leg, the leg that should be specialized in wisdom and also in the truth of the faith, is very weak. So, but still, they kind of sense this kind of schizophrenia, and I think that they are longing for deeper truth, for more stable truth, especially in moral life. And so that's why I think that going back to Aristotle and Aquinas, from this viewpoint, is refreshing for many people. For many people, it's a big discovery, and this is also the reason why this is not one of my scholarly books in a sense, even though the content overlaps my scholarly research in many ways. But it's a book that is written mostly for people who are who need to be, welcome back to ancient wisdom. So they need more entertaining language. They need some contemporary references like Spider-Man or The Lord of the Rings or Bill Murray. They need to slowly get back to common sense truth of ancient philosophy, which I think is much stronger than any other philosophy available today. I don't know. I don't want to keep talking necessarily without. But I hope that this answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer to the question. So then moving on to some of the more specific content from the book, the first question that I'd like to ask you pertains to the first chapter, which is it's called Tolkien and the Gift of Death. And in this chapter, you argue, or you rather explain that in the context of The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, he presents death as a kind of blessing for us as human beings. And then you also argue that this same way of thinking about death can be found already in ancient and medieval philosophy. And so I wanted to ask you two questions about this. And the first is just if you can clarify for the reader how it is that Tolkien makes these philosophical messages vivid to the reader. And the second question is, why is it that Aristotle and Aquinas and even I think you talk about Plato and Socrates in connection with this point too, why is it that they think that our rationality somehow points to our having a transcendence that points beyond the limitations of the natural world?
Okay, first of all, I want to clarify for everybody who is watching us that I had no idea what questions Harrison wanted to ask. So we didn't. We didn't come to an agreement. But I like this question. It's actually about the first chapter of this book. I like it a lot because. Besides, well, first of all, I like Tolkien. I like not just using Tolkien or even Spider-Man in this book as a utilitarian book. I mean, they're popular today, so I'm just using them to as a hook to get more readers or more people. No, actually, I think that the best way for a teacher, a scholar, a professor to deal with his readers and students is to talk about something that he really likes, he or she, of course, in my case, he. So if we talk about something with the passion that we share about some topics, people will be happy. The best relationship with the students and learners is when you have your eyes really smiling when you talk about some topics. So in my case, it's true that some of the deepest truths about morality and philosophical anthropology are present in some of the most common heroes of today's world, in the media, in the movies, and the book industry. So, and Tolkien served the first chapter of this topic. Why? Because if we want to go back to ancient wisdom, and also to the real roots of our Christian tradition, the real big challenge is to reverse the modern revolution. Modern revolution happened in antithesis with God. So modern time is the time in which the world is supposed to work, to function even without God. So moral philosophy had this dogma in modern time that it would be moral truth should be valid even if God didn't exist. So, which is a hypothesis that was ready as a hypothesis, as a scientific hypothesis was already present in medieval time too. But modern time actually made this a real gap. So modern thought and modern society developed the more and more as a atheistic society, either in theoretically or practically. So people don't realize how much our way of thinking is away from a world in which is really created and regulated and controlled constantly by God. So transcendence is the key feature to recover in our way to understand the human being, both as a human being and as a moral agent. So both in philosophical anthropology and ethics. So, and I think Tolkien got this point beautifully in his work, which I think is one of the Tolkien was a great philosopher and theologian. So he actually writes out of a very deep knowledge of these things. So it's not by chance. I mean, in my book I even talk about a movie like Groundhog Day, but to be honest, and I think that there are a lot of, as you will see in the book, I hope, of deep meanings that can be related to classical moral philosophy. But I'm not sure how much the directors and the producers actually realized that, right? So maybe they just did it unintentionally, using their common sense, which is a very important thing. But in the case of Tolkien, he always knew what he was doing with his work. Not in an allegorical way, but clearly, according to his inspiration was very genuine. And so something really cool about Tolkien from this viewpoint is that contemporary people would tend to see his movies. They don't really, most of the people don't read the books at this point, they just watch the movies. Shame on them, right? Shame on us if we watch movies more than reading books, right? In general. But they get the impression that there are these higher beings in the world which were lower level beings, and they have magical powers. They control I don't know, the water or the trees, or they can heal people, whatever. So it's interesting. This is a first an impression they get at the first sound from Tolkien, but because they don't usually read some of his direct explanations of his cosmogony, especially the Silmarillion, this book you mentioned. And sorry, I never watched on YouTube.
I don't think I was going to watch it.
Right. So it's going to be always
that's okay.
Side, but
yeah.
But Tolkien actually has a totally different approach to the issue. For Tolkien, between the elves and the human beings, there is no question. I mean, we have a much higher dignity, and this dignity can be seen precisely through the gift of death, which is the greatest gift, Tolkien explains, that God gave to the human beings. God, Ilúvatar, in his cosmogony, right, gave to the human being. Why? First of all, yes, if you know some Greek mythology, the gods in Greek mythology, you will understand what this means at once, like this. And because the Greek gods are like a way to look at nature, creating some personhoods behind some of the powers of nature. For example, you see the power of a volcano, and you think of a free being as a volcano, right? So you create gods. You see the thunder, and you create the god, behind that power. Or you see the beauty of nature. You create the gods out of the beauty of nature. But really, these gods are a way to just look at nature and see and attach the power of the beauty of nature to a free, higher, fake being, right? So Tolkien does more or less the same thing with the elves. The elves they actually are lower than us in his cosmogony because they belong to nature. They are this nature that we see around us. So in a sense, they are the trees, they are the rivers, they are the ocean. That's why they have more power on this world. After they die, because they can die, I mean, they don't have to, but they can die, but then they come back to this earth. It's just after some time, they go to the Mandos, holes, whatever, and they come back to this earth. But in our case, our destiny is different. Tolkien says that we are like strangers in this world. Because we are, after we die, nobody knows where we go. We are made for a higher reality, mysterious. And death is the door towards this higher reality. So we don't have that much power in this world because we are not made for this world that we know it today. We are made for a higher destiny. And Tolkien says that at the end of time, even the highest among the angels will envy us for our higher destiny. So this gives at the same time the dimension of mystery and transcendence about the human beings in Tolkien, which makes them, weird from the viewpoint of the elves, because we are like beings who live just nothing, just a few years, compared to them that can live forever. We don't live anything. We reach in no time the highest level of our human physical development, and then we decay and die. So for the elves, this is unintelligible. But from the viewpoint of God, that means that we are made for something higher. And death is at the same time a reminder on the door. Now, if you think of death, also from the viewpoint of our aspiration and ethical life, you will see that death works both as a constant reminder of our supernatural destiny of eternity, but also it's the thing to look at, to remember exactly what and who we are, morally speaking. We don't need to force our nature to think of eternity, to think of a perfect justice, of a world without pain, things that don't belong to this world. They belong to something that supposedly comes after this world, right? And that is the constant thing that is in front of us. We cannot escape that. It reminds us of. It's interesting that many conversions, even of very bad people, happen when they face death more directly. In Tolkien's cosmogony, which is parallel to the Bible from this viewpoint, Tolkien says that at the beginning of time, God made human beings last much longer on this earth, even 400, 500 years. But then he saw that we were getting too attached to this life, and we were forgetting what our real destiny and dignity is. And so he made our life here shorter so that we could be reminded more constantly about our higher destiny. So that is why death is so important. We should use it in our moral life. We should think about death, not to be scared about it, but to actually be enjoying our real destiny after death, and in order to get the real feeling about what is important and what is not important, how we should deserve whatever comes after death, and how we cannot. And this is a big part of our tradition since Plato, and it's intrinsic to our even our moral life in the catechetical tradition of the church begins precisely with our vocation to something that comes after. It's famous, Augustine for the theology of our restless heart. I mean, we are restless in this earth until we reach really our ultimate end in heaven.
Okay, yeah, great. And the one part of the question that still remains is, how is it that Plato and Aristotle discover that we have this kind of transcendent end? Just in virtue of analyzing that we are these rational animals. how does that imply that we aim at something beyond this world?
First of all, let me say something. Well, we can't be too technical in this context, and we don't have that much time. But first of all, let me say that I believe that Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, they all share exactly the same kind of culture. So sometimes we see something more in Plato and less in Aristotle, just because, unfortunately, we have, this is funny, right? We only have by Aristotle what he wrote for his students. It's actually, maybe that also his students took notes of his classes. He was actually teaching while walking around. So maybe some students were taking notes, and most of his writings, the writing we have by Aristotle, are actually these technical writings for students inside his school. They are not supposed to be read by everybody around. So, but in the case of, but he wrote also dialogues and other more popular things. We just don't have them. And in the case of Plato, we only have the writings, the things that he was writing for the education of everybody. So he didn't want to be technical. He thought that the best education was through dialogues. And so we only have 36 dialogues that he wrote. But we don't have anything that he wrote just for his disciples inside the school. So clearly, when Plato addresses all the people, he is using constantly all the features of his own culture, including the religious culture. When Aristotle addresses his students, he addresses each time the specific topic he wants to talk about. So, but I do believe that they share exactly the same culture. So several things are as much as in Aristotle's. It's just more difficult to find them in his writings, including especially transcendence, right? So usually the picture is that Aristotle was just looking at this world, and Plato was looking only at the other world, right? And Plato is so explicit about the other world, about heaven, and also about hell and purgatory. I mean, it's so clear in him. But I don't believe that this was not in Aristotle. I think that Aristotle knew exactly. There are some key passages in which he says that our real dignity is beyond, right? Is aiming at something higher than this world. And also, this can be found also in some hints that he gives about the higher part of our nature being divine in us, and about everything trying to be divine in creation. So, but I think that for Greek culture and Socrates' revolution was exactly to see us as agents who would act according to a truth, because they are not really part of this world, which in Aristotle becomes the first, in a sense, proof of the immortality and spirituality of the human rational soul, right? Of the intellect, in Greek. So I think that there is a continuity between Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle on these points, because for them it was totally clear that our real destiny and more life aims at something higher, that it doesn't belong to this world as we see it. It's a general outlook. And of course, the fathers of the church took this on immediately, because they could see that this kind of philosophy was the perfect human wisdom that could match the supernatural relation of Christ. So they started, and of course they worked at the beginning more on Plato, because Plato was more explicit about this. But then, eventually, the church found to Thomas Aquinas a more stable foundation in metaphysics and ethics to Aristotle, but without necessarily denying the truth that were highlighted about Christian faith through Plato in the first centuries. So,
all right, excellent, thank you.
This might go on and on. Right?
Yeah, that's right. I'll have to stop you there. I'm cutting you off.
And I see that I have a very good friend, two good friends from Europe here. So, ciao David and ciao Francesca.
All right. So, still actually talking some about the ancient philosophers and happy as Aquinas or ethical as Kant.
By the way, David, we should, after this talk and after, we should go back to talk about collaboration at the university level. David is a very good friend of mine who works at the university, and I think we should have a collaboration with your country. So let's talk about this eventually.
All right. Yeah, so chapter 3, happy as Aquinas or ethical as Kant. You are explaining why Kant thought that happiness is an unfitting way to ground morality, right? In the ancient tradition and the medieval tradition, just defining happiness as the possession of virtue and nothing more. I mean, because he's right that, generally speaking, if someone was very virtuous, living a miserable life, we wouldn't say that that person was happy. So how do we reconcile these two parts of Aristotle?
Well, first of all, I mean, for French scholars maybe tuned in, I cannot be, again, too technical about these things. And for readers maybe interested in this book, I definitely never try to get too technical. But that doesn't mean that what I mentioned is not deep enough. So actually, my idea of this book is that it should be a book that shows the same kind of truth, but in a way that can be immediately grasped by anybody, also in a very pleasant way. So, of course, I talk and I mention, talk about some major philosophers like even Kant or Mill, or I can't even remember all the philosophers I mentioned specifically, but I never do it in a scholarly way that might become boring for the readers. So don't get scared. And this may be more, technical than the real book. So I just wanted to make this clear before I continue. But Kant is important for me in this book, just even passing, because today many people are afraid of morality, of moral philosophy, because they have the wrong idea of morality that came mostly from Kant and from Kant-like, philosophies. Why? Because they tend to think of morality as something that frustrates our freedom, something that is a burden all the time. So it's like, I would like to do that, but there is this moral rule that tells me that I cannot. So from this viewpoint, morality is against my happiness, is against my, being spontaneous about things I like and make me really happy in life. And it's true that Kant actually had this sort of approach. Technically speaking, if we pursue our happiness, we are not moral agents, according to Kant. That doesn't mean that he doesn't recognize another meaning of happiness, but intentionally speaking, for him, a philosophy, a moral philosophy that makes me pursue my happiness is hedonism, is wrong. Is what Aristotle would call actually, being like beasts. So it's the life of pleasure. But Kant was reacting to another trend of moral philosophy, which is the utilitarian trend, that made equal the concept of happiness with the concept of pleasure. So happiness, for the utilitarian tradition against which Kant was really writing, happiness was the way maximization of our pleasures. And this, of course, is not what morality is about. Actually, if you think about your moral experience, you will see that you reach the highest level of your moral choice precisely when you act out of principle to the point of denying your pleasure. So if my kid needs some food and I don't have enough food, I give up my food, give it to him, right? So in a sense, I'm hurting myself. But if I do this for the sake of my child, I'm much more ethical than just if I just eat the food and I forget about my child, right? But the point is that this is a question of fulfillment. Ethics makes me, I'm much happier when I give up something for the sake of my child. doesn't have to happen. Maybe there is enough for both, and so I can eat nicely and love my child at the same time without giving up anything, right? So pleasure, Aristotle actually thought that in moral life, the more you act according to the real good, which is the good according to reason, the more you are also happy and maximize your pleasure. So pleasure and happiness, they tend to grow together, but there may be some, contrast between the two, right? But the point is that ethical life, when you aim at what fulfills you, this is what makes you really happy. I'm happy when I work so hard, I achieve whatever I wanted to achieve, even if working that hard made me give up many things. And an athlete is happy when he or she wins the gold medal, right? But winning the gold medal involves a lot of sacrifices, right? So again, reaching the goal of fulfillment or ethical fulfillment involves also going against your pleasures in many ways. But then at the end, you feel even more pleasure usually. But Aristotle had, and this is a major debate in Aristotle's moral philosophy, had sometimes gave a twofold account of happiness. One that is mostly focused on our pursuing the real good all the time. And I'm simplifying, of course. And one which is focused on reaching fulfillment in every aspect of our anthropological structure. So clearly, if you look at everything we have and are as human beings, we are happier if we also are full and ate enough, right? So I can be more satisfied if I can eat something and also do everything I can for my child than if I just do what I can for him, giving up my food, right? So and these two discussions in Aristotle overlap, of course, because sometimes he focuses on things that would fulfill each of our, inclinations of our nature, and sometimes he would just focus on what is the key aspect of moral life, which is acting according to the truth, and that's actually the real fulfillment. That acting according to the truth might deny our pleasure in many cases, and it might deny our big parts of our life. We might even give up our life for our country, our family, and that is a real fulfillment, ethically speaking, even though we are clearly happier if we don't do that, right? So, and this is a little ambiguity, but it can be reconciled if we just look, at these two levels of Aristotle's ethical account.
All right.
Aquinas himself talked about an imperfect happiness, or beatitude, right? The imperfect one is the one that we pursue in this life, and the perfect happiness is the one that we in the next life, which again is not exactly the same thing, but it overlaps what we just said.
Right. Great, thanks. So in the annotated table of contents, your summary of chapter 5, which is called Playing the Piano in Moral Life, begins with the assertion that freedom is the foundation. We are moral subjects because we are free. So to the ears of many people today, this thesis might seem paradoxical. We nowadays tend to think about freedom as the absence of any restraint upon our individual will, and morality is precisely such a restraint. Why is this appearance of a contradiction really an illusion?
Right.
And how does the analogy of playing the piano help to elucidate that freedom is meaningless without constraints?
Well, many people today, and this is one of the challenges that I think moral educators face. Many people don't realize, they tend to think of freedom just as something spontaneous, right? So if you're more spontaneous, you're freer. But this is actually very naive and is technically a big mistake. Imagine that you want to make a good choice about university education, right? And you're wondering whether you want to apply to medical school or to law school. Now, are you freer if you just, spontaneously, should pick one of the two without thinking much? Or you are freer if you really try to understand what it means to be a lawyer, what it means to be a physician, all the features that characterize the two different professions, and so forth, right? Clearly, you are freer if you know more. So knowing more is a commitment. It's not spontaneous at all. I need to, students, very often I welcome some students who wanting to visit the campus, right, to make a good, informed decision about the university, right? But this is not spontaneous. It's actually a very accurate commitment. The piano is an excellent metaphor or analogy, because if you want to be free to play piano, you need to constrain yourself to a lot of exercises and rule following, training for years. Because if you just put your hands on the keyboard, you're not free to play piano. I'm not free right now to play the Ninth Symphony, right? Because I'm not that good at all. So if you want to be free to do that, you have to go through a lot of training, which involves following rules for years. So in moral life, freedom is actually the freedom of the well-trained muscle that make you perform as an athlete. Is the freedom of the well-trained pianist who can, play piano because of all the training that he or she went through. Is the freedom of the person who lived, years and years of his or her life trying to pay attention to the needs of his or her relatives so that he would be able to serve them and make them happy better. This freedom is not a starting point. It's actually a big achievement. It's called virtue. So, but this freedom is what makes me really free. If I can see at once what makes unhappy my child or my wife, I'm freer to make them happy. If I don't see it, this is actually the reason why I also talk about this movie, Groundhog Day. One of the reasons that in this movie the character keeps living the same day over again because he's in this kind of time loop, magical time loop, right? But at the beginning, he's not a very virtuous person. He's actually pretty ugly person, right? So, and interestingly enough, at the beginning of this day, he doesn't see what several other people are going through. It's not just that he sees it and then he decides not to care. He doesn't even see the needs of these people. But then, living this day again and again, after he made the moral choice to be good, he starts seeing. He starts really seeing things. Sometimes unfaithful people, they don't see faithfulness. It's not just that they see it, they understand it, and they just decide to be unfaithful. They don't see it. They don't understand faithfulness, so they are not free to be faithful. Selfish people are not just free to be generous. Generosity is a long-time commitment. So this is what moral virtue is about. And from this viewpoint, freedom is the ground, the foundation of moral life, because freedom is freedom, to mention this Dominican priest, Pinker, is freedom for excellence. It's the freedom of the good pianist. It's not the freedom of the person who just sees the piano for the first time. It's the freedom of the good pianist. It's the freedom to be excellent in your life. Not just the freedom to be spontaneous, like, you don't know to do something and you just decide to do it. That's why actually movie culture in our society is tricky, because in a movie we see a character at the beginning who is, unable to do anything. And then after 90 minutes, he becomes like, the big hero, or he becomes very courageous. He was a coward and becomes very courageous. So we may get the feeling that in real life this actually can happen, but it doesn't. It can happen by chance, but usually in real life it takes 10 years to get to be really good at something, right? It takes a lot of time. And actually in this movie, Groundhog Day, the piano is part of the metaphor. So Bill Murray at the beginning of the movie cannot play piano at all. At the end of the movie, he is a great performer, which means that he has been in this day for at least 10 years. Actually, I understand that some theories about this movie thought that he would be there for, I don't know, millions of years. I can't remember, but at least they have to be 10 years, because that's what it takes to become that kind of performer at the piano.
All right, awesome. So I wanted to ask now about a chapter later in the book called "Damn Talking Cricket." And in that chapter, you discuss the talking cricket from the novel Pinocchio. And of course, the cricket is, the cricket gives Pinocchio challenging moral advice, and Pinocchio kills him. And
I'm sorry to break this to you, but it's not like the real novel is not like the Disney version. So Pinocchio actually kills the cricket in the real novel. But then it comes back as a ghost. But he actually kills the cricket.
So the conscience, you explain, is it's our ability to apply our general knowledge of the good as noble to particular circumstances to determine what we ought to do. And the reason that Pinocchio ends up killing his conscience is that it can also conflict with what we might want to do and what would be pleasing for us to do. So I wanted to ask you how this understanding of the conscience as a knowledge of an objective good as noble conflicts with or contrasts with the conception that's becoming increasingly popular amongst Catholic theologians today, especially many interpreters of Amoris Laetitia, to say nothing of what Pope Francis himself actually meant in that document, regard conscience as just the application of one's sincerely held beliefs and not this knowledge of what is objectively good. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you about the contrast between those two understandings of the conscience and the importance of the difference between them.
Right, very good question. But also, I take advantage of this question to say something technical about this book. In order to help the readers to understand that they are both reading a sort of pleasant, good about moral life, but also written in a technical way, with the idea of explaining some key concepts of moral life, I have a double table of contents. I have some impact titles for each chapter, but then I also have an annotated table of contents in which I explain what the main point morally in moral philosophy and philosophical anthropology is touched upon in that chapter. So, for example, in this chapter, then talking cricket, the other title would be reasoning and moral conscience, so that readers know that they just can enjoy a sort of editorial on Pinocchio, but actually they are trying to understand the technical meaning of moral conscience in terms of reasoning. So, and this works for all the chapters. So, well, today, moral conscience is one of the, the collateral, right, of our culture, which is mostly dominated by motivism. People just, they follow this kind of spontaneous approach to life, which is very empty. And moral conscience it becomes empty of meaning. It becomes something that is just our feeling about something, the way we feel about stuff. Actually, feeling, it's interestingly enough, became the key term to use, even to indicate what I want to do according to my moral conscience. I feel like doing that. So somehow my moral conscience is equal to a sort of feeling about my actions. This is a huge mistake. It's really huge, because we will never get what moral conscience is unless we understand that we are rational beings. So what happens in our structure as human beings is that we are animals. We are big part of what we are is animal. So from this viewpoint, we are like any other animal, and the main structure that characterizes animal life is sentient knowledge. So it's the knowledge of my hands, my eyes, my ears, my tastes. So animals react to pleasures and pains. Pleasures and pains are the mechanism of animal life. And sensation, feeling, are terms applicable to this kind of life. But then if this were animals don't have a moral conscience because they don't have to reason about the truth of what they do. They feel like eating, they eat. They fear, they escape. So, but we are not just animals, and that's why we have a double dimension in our being. So, on top of our feelings and sensations, we have our reason that understands the objectivity of what we are doing and is leading our action not according to feelings, but according to that objective reason that we detect in things. For example, we feel like eating, but our reason tells us that this is not the right time to eat, or this is not the right thing to eat, or that we should stop eating. At that point, our animal life might feel like keeping up with this food, but our reason would tell us not to. And this is what moral conscience does. It overlaps the dimension of reasoning to the dimension of feelings. And then, since we are more rational beings than animals, we feel like we have to comply with our reason more than with our pleasures. And this is moral life. Moral life means that it's more important to do what is objectively good according to our life as reason, as rational beings, than according to our just animal life. So, from this viewpoint, moral conscience has a traditionally twofold meaning. Technically speaking, is a judgment. Is our logical judgment about what to do here and now, which is according to reason. It's like a syllogism that goes from premise to conclusion. So this is the more technical meaning of moral conscience. In a more general meaning, is like the place inside our anthropological structure where we have this encounter, this meeting between, the dimension of our animal life and our rational life, in which rational life wins. Moral conscience functions according to reasoning. That's why if we do something just because of pleasure, but there is a reason not to, that's what our moral conscience will tell us. So, and that's why we feel regrets, because moral conscience, it will never submit itself to pleasures because it doesn't work at the level of pleasure, it works at the level of reason. So, if we think of our moral conscience in terms of following spontaneously our pleasures, our animal dimension, we are missing the whole point of moral conscience. It's not that, and many people just refuse to think. This is an illness I detect in many people. They don't want to think because they just want to follow their pleasures. But if they think, they might be stopped. But not by somebody else, but by their own reasoning. And that's why some people even use drugs because they don't want to think. And the only way for them to be happy, in a sense, is stop thinking because they just want to be animals. But this is not real happiness. When they're not drunk anymore, they will not feel happy. Why? Because they are human beings again. So this is really important to focus on. If we need to accept the challenge of being human, and being human means to think about our actions. Sometimes we just think honestly. We don't need to discuss with other people because our reason will just tell us something. It will be the worst judge of our actions. So the worst in a good sense, right? Because if we are honest, we just know that sometimes we act in a certain way because we don't care. And that's it. It's not, in my experience, whenever I reach the point with someone in a personal dialogue of sincerity, total sincerity, I didn't need to explain anything that nuanced about some moral rules. Because people, when they're really sincere, they know why they use drugs. They know why they have so many sexual relationships. It's not because they love so much, right? The other person. So usually it's all about sincerity. But today people are trying to get a very dangerous drug. They try to get the drug that will affect their own reasoning. They try to convince themselves that following some pleasures is actually the real good thing to do. This is a drug of reasoning, which will remain inconsistent in the long term. And this is what several people try to do, even, abusing some of the documents of the church. They try to use those documents to get the excuse to act just according to some pleasures.
Right.
But that will never work.
Right.
It might work for some people in the short time, but then we are humans. We need to think, and we need to accept the challenge of thinking. And that's exactly what I wanted to highlight, not just in that chapter, but also in some other chapters in which I focus more directly on what makes us human compared to the other, to our common nature that we share with the other animals.
Okay, that's actually a perfect segue into my next question, which is about the chapter 13, which is called The Matrix and the Experience Machine. And in that chapter, you compare the plot of the 1999 film, The Matrix, to the philosopher Robert Nozick's famous thought experiment, which is called The Experience Machine. And, one of the connections turns out to be that, both are trying to show us that we should prefer even, brutal realities over comfortable illusions. And this relates to what you're just talking about in this sort of unwillingness to follow one's reason when it cuts against one's pleasures. And I wanted to say that I think, this is a common source of a lot of our moral crises today. People are so attached to the idea of living a comfortable life that they are utterly unwilling to face unpleasant realities, even if they're morally extremely urgent. This is, I think, one of the big problems with, the prevalence of abortion today is that people are unwilling to acknowledge that, the unborn child is a human being because it's not pleasant. So they prefer to live in these sort of comfortable illusions rather than embracing harsh truths. And so I wanted to ask you, how is it possible, do you think, to get people to stop thinking in this way and to stop acting in this way? How is it possible to get people to prefer pursuing the truth, even when it might be very uncomfortable, over these comforts which can have a very powerful grasp on our will?
Right. Well, first of all, some people will always do that. The bad guy in the Matrix will always be there.
Right.
But fortunately, that doesn't work for most of the people. But it's a major deal. That's right, especially in our society, in which we have so much in terms of virtual reality. It's so easy just to focus on our, on fulfillment in terms of just experience. So, and that's why some people might just prefer experience. Well, what can we do to reverse that trend? First of all, I'm always optimistic. I think that nature does it anyway. So in the big numbers, people will always prefer to achieve something for real, even if it's painful, more painful than to just experience success without. And fortunately, we can see that also in the real life of people who are successful without discerning it. So there are, usually we know that very rich people who are born rich and they're born in all this luxury, they're not happy. Sometimes they're under, drugs. Sometimes they have to get their hands dirty to in some real jobs in order to recover who they are supposed to be. I remember that the owner of a major company in Europe made his one of his sons, children at least, work in anonymity at the bottom level of his major company, so that he would actually get the feeling what it means to work from not from the top, but from the bottom,
right,
before getting to the role of And but anyway, so I think and by the way, Thomas Aquinas would consider earthly success, easy success, as a punishment most of the time by God. Because in a sense, if God wants us to, Thomas Aquinas would say that if we run the risk of focusing on lower goods more than higher goods, for example, on the goods of our, physical life more than the goods of our spiritual life, it's better if these goods are taken away from us.
Right.
Then, because we need to recover who we really are.
Right.
And so anyway, going back to your question, I think that partly nature does it anyway. So we when we experience real things, we prefer the real things. I remember when I discovered friendship as a very young teenager, I almost stopped watching television at home because it was so much more fun to go out and do something outside with my friends. So I think a big part of it is parents. I mean, parents need to be careful. I mean, for example, with my wife, we're talking about when are we going to give the first smartphone to our kid, right? It's going to be really late. I'm sorry for him. It's going to be late. And I'd rather have him, become a horse rider before having a computer. I mean, whatever. I mean, I'm not giving any special rule in this department, but it's important that we help our kids to experience real life and to find happiness in accomplishing something for real. So if I see some people too much focused on the phone and the computer or on the video games or movies, I'm concerned. These people may be more alienated. They may be more tempted, like the bad character in that movie, to choose a fake reality just because of the experience of it in real life. Sometimes a good excursion, going fishing or going to the lake or whatever, it's a great medicine for these things. But then, of course, our society has more issues about this, and so we need to be careful. Especially, I think that most of this is about parenthood. I mean, it's really if parents are careful, their kids will be well focused on reality.
Right. Well, I do have one more question if you want to keep talking. I have reached an hour, but what do you say? Should we keep going? Or
if it's very, small question to end this interview, otherwise.
It's not a small question. It's a pretty big question, so maybe we'll just.
Well, just mentioning it. At this point, people might remain with this curiosity.
All right. So, sounds good. So the final question is about the chapter on Spider-Man, which is called Spider-Man and the Moral Web. And you talk about how virtue and sort of moral laws or principles are inextricably intertwined in this web that constitutes the whole of morality. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, especially in our present philosophical context, where you see so many philosophers nowadays saying that you have to choose whether you want to be a virtue ethicist or a rule-based ethicist. It's one or the other. And so I wanted to ask you how these are two complementary components of a single moral theory and how they're both essential to the moral life rather than having to choose one or the other.
Yes, it is a huge question, but
yeah, right.
But I want to I take advantage of it to say that Spider-Man has been probably my first love in moral life, and I want to say this also because this is very helpful for parents. What happened to me is that I started reading Spider-Man when I was in my elementary school, and but I was also coming from a family with strong moral principles, so I knew what it meant to. So I had I cannot give too much to Spider-Man in that department, but Spider-Man worked for me as a role model. And role model is the main feature of Aristotle's moral philosophy, because for him, the real rule in moral life. So Aristotle was a strong believer in rules in moral life, but his ethics was all about virtues. Why? Because the real ruling, more life must happen here and now. So the general rule will give you guidance, but then you have to understand how to apply the rule in a very concrete context, with unexpected, elements, ingredients all the time. So the real rule in moral life is the virtuous person, the phronimos in Greek. So the prudent or virtuous person works as a model to look at, to understand how to act according to the rule in real moral life. So if you want to be courageous, you need to see someone acting courageously. If you want to become a loving person, you need to follow the example of a loving person. That's why, in a sense, well, not in a sense, in a very crucial sense, Catholic morality, Christian morality in general, which is the morality of the Ten Commandments. The revealed morality works through commandments, but it's the morality in which following Christ, the sequela Christi in Latin, is the key rule. If I really want to understand what to do in my life, I need to imagine always, what would Jesus do in this context, right? So I need a role model. And for me as a kid, Spider-Man was a role model, not for everything, but for a few very important things. And I'm talking about the Spider-Man I could read in the very first, 200-300 issues historically. So the comic books today are not the same thing. And I'm not an expert of everything that happened. I just know that they become over the years very commercial. So they try to do what readers might like, and so they enslaved the plot to the needs of the business, right? So I understand that they made also some terrible choices. They figured that maybe a way to attract the attention of the readers was to make some key characters die. Then the people reacted badly, and so they had them resuscitated somehow. So including the Aunt May, the famous Aunt May of Peter, who is a big part of his moral life at the beginning, because he was trying to earn money to buy medicine for his sick aunt, and so they made her die, and then they had to, or they even gave the hint that Spider-Man was actually a clone. People reacted badly, so then they had to say, no, wait a second, he was not a clone. So whatever. But in the very first issues, there were some very strong moral themes, and for example, I got from Peter Parker the idea of pursuing a very strong interior dialogue about the truth, about things. So because Spider-Man, as a teenager, he was, I could actually, see him very close to me, because at the beginning, he's a real young teenager, right? So, and he figured at a certain point whether it was a good choice or not. But he thought that people shouldn't know what his identity Spider-Man was, because they would attack his relatives and friends. The criminals would, right? So he decided, and he was, before becoming, because being bitten by the spider, he was a nerd. The bookworm of the school, made fun of, right? Without too many friends or things like that. A very weak person. So, and weak physically, right? And so he, at that point, when he made this decision, he had to keep appearing as a bookworm, as I'm trying to remember the way they usually addressed him, as a weakling, whatever. So, and but at the same time, he was so strong. He was stronger than all of them. He was actually fighting criminals at night, and then studying really hard to catch up with the schoolwork, right? So he was really living a very virtuous life. He thought of sacrificing most of the times, even having a girlfriend or anything, just because he didn't have time. He had these powers. He had to use this power for the good and doing his best with it. But from the viewpoint of interior dialogue, reading the comics, you could see the difference between the way he was appearing outside and the way he was really inside. And sometimes some people could detect in his eyes that he was not afraid, but he had to escape from people who wanted at school just to beat him up. He couldn't, take them on because, he couldn't appear strong. This is something that contemporary movies don't respect. In the contemporary movies, he immediately looks really cool at school, but this is not Spider-Man. He doesn't beat up Flash, never, in the real comic books at the beginning. So he's a young guy who. So when I was in my elementary school, I thought immediately that what I really was what I was inside. I could even be beaten up outside. That didn't mean anything compared to my dignity. I couldn't. He was not afraid. He was, sometimes beaten up strongly by criminals, but not feeling afraid. So, and this is actually what I did. I remember very well that when I was in my third year in elementary school, so I don't know, maybe I was 9, or I was actually highly committed to defend the weaker people in my school, and I had to be like Spider-Man. That was a role model. So this thing tells me how important it is for even my kids to grow up with the right role models. Through these role models, you will see in real life what the moral rule is. The moral rule is living that kind of life, being that kind of person. So the real person, the virtuous person, is the incarnation of the moral rule. But without the moral rule, you don't have the pianist, right? If you don't learn how to put your hands on the keyboard, you're not a pianist. So if you don't follow the moral rule, you're not virtuous. But if you really want to see that moral rule, you need to look at the real virtuous person. So you need the saint. You need the saint who lived poverty like St. Francis at a very good level to understand poverty, and you need the saint who was really loving the truth like St. Thomas Aquinas to understand what that means. I mean, to take seriously your reason and mind and so forth. You need Spider-Man too. I needed Spider-Man, and so anyway, this is. I think we should cut it short.
All right. Yeah, that's a great response. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening again. We are here today talking about Fulvio's most recent book. Can you get that in front of the... There we go.
Yes.
Ancient Wisdom and Thomistic Wit, Happiness in the Good Life. And this is available. We'll post links, but it's available through Amazon. And
I can see, actually, that my wife is online from Italy. So Francesca already thanked you for the cover of the book, which I told everybody that is your creation and your picture. I understand, right? Do you copy? Is it your picture? And by the way, my wife too has never seen this book, so I'm gonna have to.
Right.
She's gonna see it probably in a couple of weeks. But this is the first time for me, and so it's your book, but it's still far away.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and stay tuned. We're going to have more live events like this in the future. So, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Yeah, too bad. I mean, the Thomas International